Hi and welcome to episode 2 of The Piper in the Cave. First, let me acknowledge that this has been recorded on the land of the Kombumerri clan of the Ugambe people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future and acknowledge that sovereignty over this land was never ceded. This week we have a couple of tunes, a classic piping jig, the Miners of Wicklow, and then quite an unusual set dance called Is the Big Man Within. Miners of Wicklow, let's start with. Very much associated with Patsy Toohey, although there is kind of another version also from a piper, I guess you'd say a West Clare version, recorded by Tommy McCarthy. I'm not sure what his source was originally. And you can also hear Tommy Keane playing that version, though the majority of other recordings out there tend to stick to the Toohey version, which is roughly what I've done too. But they're different enough that they're clearly the same tune, but it's not like you could get away with playing one while the other is playing in a session, for instance. The West Clare one is perhaps just a little simpler and more modal in its feeling than the Toohey version. But at the same time, it's not one of those tunes that Toohey really got into his full pyrotechnics with. There's a few little nice crunchy bits of technique in there, but honestly it's quite a smooth, flowing, danceable tune as he played it. And then Is the Big Man Within, very much not a piping tune. There's, as far as I found, no uilleann piping recordings out there, and I'm careful to say uilleann piping because there's a beautiful Altan recording with Carlos Nunez playing the Galician gaita. So there's pipes there, but not these guys. And the only other real recording out there is a lovely one by James Kelly, which is where I first heard the tune. It's got a really unusual structure and feel to it, so I'll just talk a bit about that. As far as I know, there's no other set dance that does comparable things. So basically the first part is in slip jig time, and the second part is in double jig, or regular jig time. So if I just try and kind of count while I play it, which can be a risky proposition, but the first part, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then the second part, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So you can, if you were confused by when I played them before, maybe that straightens things up, or maybe that confuses you more, who knows, because it's an odd thing in a few different ways. Also, if it's played as a set dance, there's a change of tempo too, so I won't demonstrate, but it goes from a sort of comfortable, relaxed slip jig tempo to a very, very slow jig tempo, very held back. Which is something I haven't done. I've followed both the Altan and James Kelly versions, which just keep the same tempo. Obviously not appropriate for the set dance itself, but I think a perfectly nice way to approach this musically, where the tempo change can be a bit unusual. There's no like proportional relationship, it just genuinely shifts from one feel to another. If I knew my dance terminology, I might be able to go into a bit more detail, but I don't there. Maybe someone out there can help me. Also, for a dance, you would play the first part of that tune doubled, which really drags out and can be quite beautiful and hypnotic. The reason I haven't done that, Altan did it in their recording to good effect, I think. The reason I haven't done this, to me, it just makes the tune feel a little unbalanced because the second part is then so short if you're playing it at that faster tempo, and only once through, or only twice through, I guess, as opposed to 4 times through. Okay, Yeah, and the other thing that makes this just a really weird tune is kind of a harmonic observation, I suppose, on melodic harmonic. So, I mean, one of the most unspoken rules of pretty much any music you're likely to listen to, certainly in any Western music, from the vast majority of classical music to the vast majority of popular music, has this unspoken, well, sometimes spoken, but often unspoken rule that you change chords on the first beat of the bar. And, you know, if you don't, then often you'll write it out in such a way that you do, if that makes sense. I don't know. But this tune does something really unusual. So again, if I try and count my way through it, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Getting a little leak there, but so maybe you could hear that really there's kind of a strong emphasis on the 2, which is because that's where the melody suggests a chord change. And if I do that with the regulators, I actually won't count it this time because I think that'll be a bridge too far for my coordination. But we'll have so you can hear, you know, creating a fairly obvious kind of melodic or contrapuntal shape on the regulators. It really does want to shift on the second beat of every bar. And then of course when you get into the second part, it evens right out and becomes really quite a conventional, if I think quite attractive jig. So, and then we just go. So those harmonic changes tend to land where you expect them to on the main beats of the bar in that. And I mean, that's just a feature of the tune. It's kind of always going to be heard that way. Even, you know, if there's a dance there and they're kind of maintaining a fairly clear slip jig sort of rhythm and movement, then there's still going to be a lot of weight given to that beat too. And that's just something to kind of play around with. It's what makes this tune interesting, on one of the things. What I will say there, before I move on to something a bit different, is that the one place you can kind of start to suggest a really strong beat 1 is right at the end when it goes up to the D. So for instance, if I'm playing away emphasizing the 2, I can actually get away with putting a big fat regulator chord on the 1 there to kind of remind us that where the beat actually is, as you know the dance has it, rather than where you'd tend to think if you hear this melody. So let me just demonstrate that quickly. And I kind of like to emphasize that now and again, though you could get away with just keeping that chord change, that main emphasis on the second beat of the bar or the phrase, however you like to think about it. You could get away with that, but I do like to kind of remind people going into the second part that it is actually 1, 2, 3, not 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's probably all to say there, but yeah, just I guess a summary is there is this really juicy, unusual ambiguity there, and that's something that you can either totally lean into and let people kind of get a bit disoriented as to how they should be feeling this melody, or perhaps try and, as best you can, actually go against the obvious implications of the melody and keep that really steady slip jig feel going. And the thing I like to do, even if I do kind of lean into some of that ambiguity, is really then make the second part quite clear in its implications, to get people back home, essentially. Let them find their feet before you go and do weird things again. And if you were listening closely, you know I actually was a little bit cheeky in that I cut a beat off the end of the first tune when I made the change, so got to remember how it goes now. Sorry. Second part. Ah, yeah. Rather than. So yeah, again, leaning right into that, where is the beat one? Do we actually feel the main beat of this tune on the two? Okay, that's all I'll say about that. Maybe an obvious thing to move on to there, or where I'd like to move on at least, is I think because this first part of the second tune especially is so kind of hypnotic, I guess there's not a lot happening melodically, so you can kind of just relax into it. I mean, you could almost get away with playing. Those extra notes are almost an embellishment of just that kind of quite static melodic through line, I guess. And because of that, it feels very open to a bit of variation, a bit of kind of playing around. And I'll just, I didn't go hell for leather in that, but I did try and do a few things. So, again, a bit of chord theory may help here. But the first thing I'd like to suggest is actually just reversing the order of these melody notes. So where you have G, E, F, D, put those two notes the other way. Or keep the notes the same way around, but just add a bit more movement, staying on those same two notes that are really the kind of melodic core of this. Oh, sorry, what was I going to do? Kind of not going far, but enough to, I think, suggest something a bit different. Going a bit further would be to do the kind of harmonic analysis of what's going on here. And to me, it's really an E minor, an E minor chord, and then a D chord. So that's your E minor. That's your D. So the notes that are part of those chords that aren't heard in the melody are a B for the E minor chord and a D, and an A for the D chord. So you could start to insert some of those notes into your melodic variation. Or even notes that are outside of those, but keeping the main kind of emphasis on those notes that are either part of the melody or strongly implied by the melody. So I guess what I mean there. So I'm putting in little, what would you call them? Passing notes would be how they're often described in music theory, but the notes in between these main melody notes that are also implied in the harmony. So, in that case it's an F sharp between the G and the E, or an E between the F sharp and the D. Or even going, a step outside again. I really like a little C natural in over that first phrase. Something like that. And the final thing I found myself doing there, second final thing maybe, is this little backstitch, and I take a little kind of perverse joy in, you know, playing the Patsy Tui tune where perhaps you expect all this over-the-top backstitching and keeping it relatively restrained, and then chucking the more virtuosic backstitch movements into that second tune. But maybe that's just me. But what I did there was, so based on that version we just played, chucking in your left-hand backstitch notes between those melody notes I just played. So I'll try and slow that again. Something like that. So if you've only explored backstitches where you stay on the one note, I think these are a really interesting alternative. So what I mean by that is perhaps you've done something like, so your main note is the G there, and you're chucking in those C sharp and A backstitch notes in between two Gs. In this case, we're chucking them in between a G and an F sharp, and then an E and an F sharp. And the same, just move down then. In some ways, I think that's kind of a little more musical than something, say, you could do in in the Miners of Wicklow. In the second part, you could play, which is kind of, you know, your classic backstitch, keeping those, staying on the notes F sharp and G in that case. Quite a kind of, I mean, obviously it's staccato, but it has quite a very kind of restrained, almost a little constipated sort of feel to it, whereas I think playing is keeping more of a gentle melodic feel while still chucking in a bit of crunchiness there. Okay. One last thing to talk about there. I may go too long with this video, but we'll see. And this is something I fully intend to address in more depth in another video, but I just want to mention it briefly because perhaps you heard it and were curious, and if not, perhaps it's something to look forward to. I'm doing a variant of an Ennis cran here. And yeah, I want to give full respect to how Seamus Ennis did his Ennis crans, obviously. Ennis crans. Given that we've gone so far as to name this whole technique after him, I think he deserves a say, and I'm doing something a bit different. So that discussion will have to wait for later. But how I would describe it, and we'll look at this little phrase in the Miners of Wicklow. So that's it with conventional crans on the E and the D. For a moment, actually, let's just do the D one. So this phrase. And let's actually think that we're changing the melody a bit to be so there's an extra A in there. So you know the notes there: F sharp A, D A. Sorry, F sharp A, F sharp, D A D. And in that D A D, as I move up to the A, I'm actually just lifting these two fingers. So. hard to do slow and make it feel like something, but I'll try and slow it down. If you, well, yeah, you probably play an F, G, A triplet at some point, whether high octave or low octave, shouldn't matter. So it's exactly those same finger movements I'm doing there. And like I'm just lingering on that A for a while. But I'm off the leg. Oh, sorry. So that's, yeah, just I think a nice little bit of both melodic, changing the melodic implications of the tune while throwing in still some of that low D cran feel to it. And could also do the same with my E cran essentially, except this time I'm moving up to the B. I could do it on the A too, but I think the B is more musical in this case. So again, that's our new kind of melodic variant, rather than. But I'm going to put the two together, play those two same notes on my way up to the B as the cran notes. So yeah, an interesting kind of cran variant to throw in there, which also highlights an upper note. And doing it on the B is taking it a step again away from, it's not quite an Ennis movement as it is, but doing it on the B is taking it a step away from what Ennis did. So I want to flag that I'm not doing Ennis, and he deserves that kind of treatment at some point. Okay. Last thing, and I think this is kind of the thing I find most interesting, is just about how we kind of shape the jig rhythm. You know, a lot of times in this music we're doing some kind of a swing or a rhythmic push-pull, however you want to look at it, something away from making every note exactly the same length. And I think, you know, I've played these at a relatively relaxed tempo, and that allows this to kind of come out a little more. But what I'm essentially doing is, you know, jigs in groups of three, and I'm lengthening the one of those groups of three, and therefore I need to shorten the two to make up for that. So rather than playing it exactly evenly, the first tune would be. Something like that, or faster. Stuck in that weird cran line now. Just do conventional ones. Which is, you know, fine, but to me it is more musical to kind of just ever so subtly lengthen the first of each grouping, and by that I mean. And it can, it's one of those things, if you're thinking too much about it, you're almost certainly going to play something that just sounds really artificial. So really you should just be thinking, you know, how do the notes go? But there's a few kind of things, I guess I like to think of it as checking in with that rhythm. And to me, a really great place to do that is when you go up to the back D. So that's the first phrase. And what you can do is just lengthen that back D. Think about kind of letting that note sing out just a bit. overemphasizing there, but hopefully it gives you the idea. Or the other thing you could do is actually make it staccato. And that extra little bit of finger work you're doing to make it staccato will kind of actually tend to take up a little more time and suggest for your fingers that this is a pattern to follow. I think that very naturally, if you are making that D staccato, it will kind of lead you towards that da 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 rather than da 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 da. And I would say the same in quite a few places. You can think about making the first note of each group staccato. You wouldn't do it all the time, or it would sound really just square and wouldn't have that melodic flow. But you know, first three notes. However you're separating those three A's. Think about making that F sharp a staccato note. And that it's weird, like you're shortening a note to lengthen a note. It kind of doesn't make sense. But because it does involve just a bit of extra finger and brain work, it does tend to take up more time, and you can use that to your advantage by doing it on beat one. Or another one I like to do is at the very end of that part, cutting that E short. And yeah, I mean, this is probably starting to sound, because I'm slowing it down and overemphasizing it, it's starting to do what I don't want it to do and sound a bit too a bit kind of predictable, because I think it can be really powerful to then alternate some of that more clipped rhythm with some slightly more flowing sections too. Not sure that was the best example, but trying to kind of keep you guessing as to when I'm going to really outline that dunk-a-dunk, dunk-a-dunk, and when I'm just going to kind of let the melody just float along a little more without, I guess, needing to give it that kind of attention. And I would say the same sort of principle applies when I was doing those weird crayons just before. Because I am cramming in that little bit of extra finger work on the first beat, it is naturally going to push the second beat backwards. So you can use these things to good effect, and of course it's the same principle that will sometimes actually muddy up your rhythm if you're trying to cram in too much finger stuff. You know, like, I don't know, a tune like the Harvest Home second part, you know, you hear, if you're doing that sort of stuff, and it kind of, you take too long, because it's hard getting those notes in quickly, and you know, you're getting a bit clogged up, and therefore you're taking too much time and the rhythm suffers. It's using the same thing of getting a little bit clogged up, but using it strategically, I guess, to actually help your rhythmic placement and that rhythmic feel. And I guess the final note I want to end on with relation to that is, I think as pipers we actually need to think especially closely about these sorts of things, because we struggle with dynamics on this instrument. And I don't want to take away from the fact that you can give a dynamic emphasis by lifting the chanter or by using a fingering that has more holes open as an alternative. That's all really important, and we should be thinking about that stuff too. But the fact is we can't get a big fat accent like you can on a fiddle or on an accordion or on a flute. So duration becomes a more important tool for us in suggesting how to convey some of these dance rhythms and let things kind of have that lift and momentum that this music thrives on. So I think, I guess I think we need to pay a special attention to duration as an expressive device in this instrument, which is not something we often think about. And it's something, you know, I'm still having revelations, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but I want to just leave that there. Hopefully that's a thread we can pick up on later. And I think that's all I want to say. I think I've gone on too long, but thank you for tuning in for the Piper in the Cave episode 2. Again, please, do drop me a line if you have any thoughts or comments on what I'm doing, and I hope to see you next time. I'm now going to just roll that recording again. Thank you, Alex, for the suggestion, by the way. So perhaps some of those things I talked about you may be able to hear more clearly and give more attention to this time around. Thank you. I'll see you next time.